Welcome back, class. Professor G here. Today we're going to discuss ancient Egypt. Now, ancient Egypt is it's something that we're probably all somewhat familiar with. After all, most of us have either seen a movie based in ancient Egypt. There's a recent one recently, Gods of Egypt or something like that. There was the Exodus movie recently. And typically, when we think of ancient Egypt, usually the first image that comes to our mind is of the pyramids. And specifically the pyramids of Giza, the three major superstructures just outside of modern-day Cairo. So if you're thinking of that, I want you to ask yourself this question. It's obvious that a lot of time and a lot of effort went into building these things. And typically speaking, if you are examining a culture or if you're examining a civilization or a society, if you want to get some insight into where this society's emphasis is or where their attention went to or where they put their time and effort into, you look at the material things of that society, what the society produced. Okay? So if you look at American culture, right, what are the things that most of us spend our time doing, or where's a lot of our money spent, right? You might say entertainment, maybe gaming, maybe television, Netflix, Hulu, that sort of thing, right? Millions and millions of dollars are put into the entertainment industry each year. And so a future historian may say, well, they put a lot of emphasis on entertainment. So looking at the pyramids, what does this tell you, or what does this tell us about ancient Egyptian society? Well, what are the pyramids? Well, they're the tombs of the pharaohs. All right, well, every civilization that we've talked about, and every civilization period, I believe, has buried their dead. So that in and of itself is not that unique. What is unique is the scale of these tombs, the scale of the pyramids. So obviously, the ancient Egyptians put a lot of thought, time, effort, money, labor, resources, everything into the pyramids, which reflects their general interest. So the pyramids are tombs, but they show this Egyptian fascination and maybe obsession with death. Death and what happens after death. And so for my discussion of ancient Egyptian society and ancient Egyptian culture, I think this is one of the hallmarks. It's reflected in the archaeology, it's reflected in the history, and you see this when, the pyramids are typically what people think of when they think of Egypt, and the pyramids represent their ideas of and the expression of their fascination with death. That being said, ancient Egyptian civilization is one of the oldest civilizations in history, period. Ancient Egyptian civilization lasted for about 3,000 years. Think about that for a second. 3,000 years. Think about how old America is, right? 240-ish years old. Ancient Egyptian civilization is so old. So in a few weeks we'll talk about ancient Greece. Ancient Egyptian civilization is so old that ancient Greek historians were writing histories of ancient Egypt. This is how old it is. And it lasted for 3,000 years. So that's an extremely long period of time. So there's no way that I could even begin to touch the surface of ancient Egypt. But I'm going to try. All right, just hit just a very, very few highlights. Okay. So we talked a bit about their culture. One of the trademarks or the hallmarks of their culture is the religious traditions and the religious rituals surrounding and pertaining to death and the afterlife. And we'll get to that here in a second. Let's do some brief history. Ancient Egyptian civilization has its beginnings, as with every civilization that we'll talk about, beginning with the Neolithic Revolution, hits ancient Egypt about 9,000 BC. We have the domestication of cattle in ancient Egypt. Beginning about 6,000 to 5,000 BC, we start to see Egyptian settlements built on agricultural settlements built around the Nile. And this is another thing that I forgot to mention. Ancient Egyptian civilization has always been centered on and around the Nile River. So if you want to pull up a map of Egypt, the Nile River is it goes straight through the heart of Egypt. And the Nile, so when we talk about ancient Egyptian civilization, as far as if you're thinking where we're talking about in your mind, just think Nile. Okay, because Egypt is predominantly a desert region. It's an arid region. And so the civilization aspect of it is centered and revolves around the Nile. Okay, so we have these early settlements about 6,000 BC springing up around the Nile, and this really forms the basis, the kind of bedrock of Egyptian civilization. So, one of the hallmarks that we talked about was the construction of the pyramids. Well, the first pharaoh, and we'll talk about what exactly it means to be pharaoh here in a second, but the first pharaoh to start off this pyramid building trend was the pharaoh Dozier. And Dozier was thinking about how he wanted to be buried, and so he hired an architect named Imhotep to design a burial structure. And Imhotep designs the first pyramid. Now this is a step pyramid, beginning around 2600 BC is when this thing was constructed. And so this kind of sets the trend of the whole pyramid building, the whole tomb building fad, if you want to call it that, that was adopted by almost every pharaoh after that. Almost every pharaoh after that has some sort of elaborate burial site. And you'll see that. You can go look up some examples of that. Probably the most famous example and the only surviving example we have of what this might have looked like is King Tut. If you've ever been to the King Tut Museum, or if you want to look up what was found in King Tut's tomb, right, this might be a good addition to the lecture. Okay, so the Pharaoh Dozier hires Imhotep to construct his burial site, and Imhotep constructs the first pyramid about 2600 BC. Moving right along here to the New Kingdom period from about 1500 to 1000 BC, you have some of the most famous pharaohs in history, in Egyptian history. And each one of these have something very unique about them. For example, the first pharaoh here is Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut is the first female pharaoh in Egyptian history, and indeed, Hatshepsut is probably one of the first, if not the first, female ruler in history that we know about. But she's not important just because she's a female, she's important because she was a really good pharaoh. Hatshepsut ruled for about 22 years, and this was a period of peace and prosperity throughout Egypt. Hatshepsut also made several advances and contributed to Egyptian culture, especially within the realm of what we would call modern day medicine, but what they would call magic. We'll get to that here in a second, but that's a very important divide because we don't want to read into the past. Anyway, so you have Hatshepsut, the first female pharaoh. You also have Amenhotep IV. Amenhotep is unique because once he became pharaoh, he changed his name to Akhenaten, and he radically altered Egyptian religious belief. Now, Egyptian religion is and was polytheistic. Remember, polytheism is a belief in a worship of multiple gods, the belief that there are more than one God. Well, when Akhenaten becomes pharaoh, he says, no, there's only one God, the one true sun god, Aten, and you should all worship him. Well, they did while Akhenaten was still alive, and once Akhenaten passes away, Egyptian religion kind of reverts back to what it has always been, this polytheistic religion. And the Egyptian people didn't really like the reforms of Akhenaten. In fact, they didn't like him so much that they literally tried to erase Akhenaten from history. Right? Later pharaohs sent scribes to chisel out Akhenaten's name, to make the people forget what he tried to do to Egyptian religion. Also during the New Kingdom, we have the rule of Ramses II. Ramses II. Ramses is probably one of the most powerful pharaohs to ever rule Egypt. He greatly expands Egyptian territory. Not only that, but historically speaking, he's interesting because Ramses II signs the world's first peace treaty after the Battle of Kadesh. Ramses and this other tribe agree that they will no longer pursue hostile relations with each other. They no longer will attack each other. And so this is a very interesting development within the historical record. Okay, so let's talk about Egyptian religion, probably one of the most distinctive aspects of Egyptian culture. There are two central foci of Egyptian religion, two central aspects of Egyptian religion. First of all, we have the pharaoh, and second of all, we have the gods. Now, even though I've separated these are very much intertwined with each other. So, the pharaoh is not just a king. Okay, the pharaoh rules, and the pharaoh carries out political aspects and it handles economic business and handles trade business and keeps the kingdom in order. But he's not just a king, because the pharaoh is also a representative of the gods, a representative of the gods who, when he dies and goes into the afterlife, will one day become a god if he's a good pharaoh. So the pharaoh and the gods. Now, Egyptian gods. So if you go back to the previous lecture, if you remember, when I was talking about Mesopotamian religion, Egyptian gods are similar to Mesopotamian gods in several respects. Okay, the gods. There's multiple gods. Different cities usually chose a god that they felt represented their cities. But when I say the gods, ancient Egyptian religion, we mean much more than just what you would think of like our current conception of God, right? It's not just several gods sitting up there. We also mean other entities. And again, this is tricky to talk about because we usually have different understandings of these words. I guess what today we would consider to be like angels and demons, right? This is also in the Egyptian pantheon. It's not just gods, it's also spirits. And when I say spirits, I don't mean like haunted house, ghost spirits, nothing like that. And the Egyptian gods were, generally speaking, unlike the Mesopotamian gods, the Egyptian gods were generally speaking benevolent. They were benevolent, but kind of indifferent. The Egyptian gods aren't inherently bad. It's not like the Egyptian gods are out to get you somehow. It's not like the Egyptian gods are meddling in human affairs just to create strife and chaos and drama, kind of like the Greek gods will do. But they're not really out to help you, per se. But as far as like everyday religion goes, as far as like what the individual Egyptians would practice, Egyptian religion is inundated with magic. Now, when I say magic, I don't mean like David Blaine magic, right? They're not like doing tricks and floating around and freezing themselves in ice or anything like that. Magic, kind of abstractly defined, magic is the belief that certain rituals, certain physical practices such as lighting a candle or pouring a salt circle or repeating or chanting a certain phrase will somehow impact physical reality. That you can bind gods or spirits to your demands, and that you can force these gods or spirits that have a power greater than yourself to act in physical reality on your behalf. So, for example, you have magic amulets that were supposed to invoke the god's protection. Perhaps if you were having a child, you would perform a certain ritual to ensure a safe birth. So this is what I mean by magic, not like David Blaine type magic. Okay. So the gods and the pharaohs, Egyptian religion was very, very much centered around the common everyday performance of magical rituals, of sacrifice at the temples. And the Pharaoh is supposed to be God's representative, but most importantly, the Pharaoh would become a god upon his death. Now, the other aspect of Egyptian religion that I think is very important is the Egyptian concept of Ma'at. Now, Ma'at kind of literally translates as order, but order isn't really, it doesn't give us the robust meaning of the word. Because when I say order, it's kind of lackluster to you, probably. You don't really, but with Ma'at means order, but order for the Egyptians meant justice, meant truth, virtue, peace, right? Order meant keeping things together, keeping things running smoothly. Now, Ma'at inundated every aspect of the Egyptian religion, every aspect of the religious hierarchy. And the opposite of order is, of course, disorder. In the Egyptian kind of worldview, the Egyptian universe, there was this constant struggle between order on the one hand and disorder on the other hand. That disorder is constantly bumping up against order. That disorder is constantly threatening to overtake order. And you see this at every level. You see it with the gods, right? Osiris is the god of agriculture. He's the god of the sun. He's the god of growth. He's the god of light. Seth is the god of night. Seth is the god of mischief, the god of disorder, the god who is constantly trying to undermine Osiris. And Seth and Osiris are constantly bumping up against each other. They're constantly battling each other. And they sort of embody this universal strife between order and disorder. And this is seen for the Egyptians, for example, in day and night. Light equals order. Day equals order. It's when you get stuff done. It's when you issue orders. It's when the sun is out. Everything is clear. Everything is bright. Everything is true. But night always comes. And night represents disorder. Nothing good happens at night, so the saying goes. Right? Night represents sneaky business. Things are hidden by the dark. We perform evil deeds at night. This is disorder. Now, it is the Pharaoh's job, in addition to maintaining his kingdom, it is the Pharaoh's job to provide Ma'at for the people, to keep the people in order, to keep his kingdom in order. It's not just because he wants to keep power as Pharaoh, but he wants to maintain this universal order. And where disorder threatens the most is at times of transition. The transition from one Pharaoh to the next. The transition of a new tax system, a new season, a new official proclamation. And so it is the Pharaoh's job to keep the world running in order. But disorder also affects the individual. Disorder constantly threatens to interrupt the order of the individual's life. We're all this close from disorder taking over. We're all this close from losing people we love, from getting a medical bill that's going to stay with you so long, it's going to cause you so much debt, from not being able to pay our mortgage, from not being able to pay the water bill. All of this represents for the Egyptians disorder. And it is the purpose and function of Egyptian religion to keep order. And this idea of Ma'at extends into the afterlife as well. Because after death, the Egyptian religion tells us that all of us will be judged by how much order we kept in our lives. And this is seen in depictions of the weighing of the heart. Okay? If your heart had a lot of order, great, you would be able to transition into the afterlife. If not, then you were fed to this alligator, leopard, demon thingy. Okay, so Ma'at has a fundamental role to play in Egyptian religion. Okay, folks, hope this video helped. If you have any questions, email me.